We are starting today on Ezra chapter 4. That is somewhere in the end of the middle.
I know, I literally opened right to it.
No, you did not.
That is so weird, isn't it?
There's only like 8 chapters in the whole thing, and you opened right to, well, that is a sign if I've ever heard one. So, welcome, Alicia. Welcome, Nicole. Welcome to all of you who may or may not be joining us on Facebook Live or on the recording later on YouTube, because we're cross-pollinating as much as we can. This is week 3 of this study that we've been doing into Ezra, Nehemiah, into this historical account of a people who are rediscovering who they are, sort of building up a people out of the ashes of what was left behind. So I will just start today, probably should start every day with a brief synopsis, like a previously on kind of deal, right? So I'm going to share my timeline with you and say that this is roughly the timeline that we're working with. The people of Judah had, a kingdom, a small kingdom. I mean, there's maybe 150,000 people in it. It's not some great world nation or anything like that, but it was very unique and peculiar people that had a long history. And they were conquered by Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians in 587 or so. So about 20 years this way towards that side. And the wealthiest, what do we say, somewhere probably about 25% of the people were taken away out of their land and brought into Babylon, into exile. Pretty much everyone who was a skilled tradesperson, who was in any line of royalty, who was a soldier, anyone who might pose a threat if they were left behind, got taken out. So all of the land that was left, all of that sacred land and people's homes and people's vineyards and all of that stuff was just kind of left to whoever was left behind. So as you can imagine, probably some generations settled into lands that didn't belong to them before the exile. So if there's ever going to be a return, there's probably going to be some drama. And this is what we get when Cyrus, King Cyrus of Persia, Cyrus the Great, comes in, and there's a kind of a bloodless conquest of Babylon, because Babylon is awful at ruling an empire. They got in over their heads, and they were like, this is a lot more work than we thought it was going to be. We don't have time for parties or anything fun like that. Please take this empire away from us. And Persia came in, and they just gave it up. And then they ruled. And their policy was to send everyone home. Anyone who was conquered, go home. Get out of here. We don't want you in our town. We want you back in your place. We want you to rebuild your cities and rebuild your temples so that you can have a thriving economy and pay us in taxes. This is just kind of a way of building up, making their constituencies happy so they don't rebel. So that is right here. This was in chapter 1. Was King Cyrus says, all right, everyone, you've lived here for 70 years. You can go home. We talked last time about the 1,000 people that went. It wasn't much. And they were given all of the money that they could possibly want. They were given cedars of Lebanon, and they were given gold, and anything that was stolen from the temple was returned, and they were able to go home and do whatever they needed right here. And so they got there, and then another, 48,000 people came or something like that, and they started construction of the second temple. This is where we are. Okay. We remember last time we read that they built a small, humble altar in the place where the original altar was, a place that was probably covered in broken boulders and things. And they built a small open air altar that was humble and simple. And they simply worshiped at that altar for 2 years before they began the process of building the temple in earnest. And so they lay the foundations of the temple, and that is where we left off last time. So roughly in this area, maybe actually closer to here is where we're now. 525. King Cyrus, the one who sent them back, he's dead. Cambyses II is in charge. That may or may not be important. We're going to find out when the king who offered you all of those benevolencies is gone now. Oh, you're joined by a dog, Nicole. That's wonderful. I thought I had the dogs.
Oh.
Apparently I don't.
Mhm.
All right. So to this point, everything in our story is good news. The whole book starts with good news. It starts with Cyrus giving them all the money and sending them home. And then they go home, and every step along the way, they succeed. Everyone that goes is full of goodness and good spirit. The people who are building this thing are in one accord. Everyone seems really happy and well adjusted, which you should know should not last for very long.
I'm gonna say, how long does that ever?
Right. If you've ever tried to build something new, especially if you've ever tried to build something new in the midst of people who are used to doing it another way,
Mm.
probably going to run into some problems, right? Because and this will become a much bigger deal next week probably. But who are the real children of Israel? Was it the priests and the Levites and the line of David and all of the wealthy people that got taken away into Babylon, who lived for a generation or two in a foreign land, got mixed up in other foreign religions, and then came home? Or is it the mostly uneducated people who stayed behind without a temple to worship in, and maybe potentially intermarried with other people in the Canaanite region? Who's the real children of Abraham? Who's the real children of God? The learned people who went away and changed, or the unlearned people who stayed behind and maybe changed a little bit too? I don't know. But they're going to try to, this is going to be a consideration you should probably keep in your mind as we go through this. And maybe something that we should keep in mind too, especially if we're people who are reforming something. You know, Open Table is a church that is dedicated to reimagining what the church is. But that, if we're not careful, can carry with it certain connotations, right? That the thing that we're reimagining is not the real thing anymore. That the churches that we left are not good churches anymore, right? You could kind of get that feeling that if we're feeling we have to change something, then that is a criticism of the thing that's still here. I want to be really careful not to fall into that, you know. Actually, it's a good question to start on. What is something from the religion that you maybe have left behind, or something that you've grown out of, or something that you remember from the past, something that is an old way of doing church that still brings you life, that is still good to you?
I still appreciate the hymns.
Yeah, same.
Thing.
Nicole loves liturgy as well.
I was gonna say, yeah, had a conversation with somebody yesterday who we were just gushing about how much we love liturgy and how like it feels outdated,
Mhm.
but it's really rich if you have good liturgy.
Yeah. I don't know liturgy is, but I don't feel like in my history of being, it was like liturgy wasn't something we had.
Okay.
Defining it wrong.
liturgy is, if you've ever gone to a church where they do like a call and response, where things are kind of like written for you. Things like a call to worship, where, you know, like the pastor says something or the leader says something. It doesn't have to necessarily be the leader, the pastor being the leader, but somebody says something and there's a response. Or corporate prayers that are like written down and said together as a group. So like things that are kind of like pre-written that people read and respond out loud, versus just kind of being like freestyle.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Would you add anything to that, Zach?
Nope. That's it.
Yeah.
I never had liturgy as a kid.
I didn't either until we went to the UCC, and wow, this is really rich. And you're like, nah.
You know, one of the things that I criticize, and I know a lot of people criticize about the modern church, is that it can often be more of a social club than an actual group of people being discipled in Christ. And I'm certainly somebody who has felt that way about the church, but I think the church does better than almost anyone at being a social club. There's very few places where people can come who are just like the worst people and the least agreeable people and the most obnoxious people who can come and find a loving home.
Yeah.
Like, you try to pull half the stuff you do at church at like the Lions Club and you'll
Right.
find your membership revoked.
Right.
But we are really good at making a wide tent of people when it comes to fellowship, and
Yeah.
I don't want to lose that.
Right.
So,
Right.
okay, so then let's start with chapter 4. I think it's, when we're doing this study, we're not going to read through every verse and chapter and talk about each individual verse, because that'll bog us down. But this is one of the ones that I do want us to read. So there's some big names in here. I'd be happy to read it if you'd like.
You start.
Okay, I'll start. So just the names Judah and Benjamin. This is referring to the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. This is all that's left of the 12 tribes of Israel, Judah and Benjamin. So when we refer to them, we're talking about Judea, all of Israel, basically. Zerubbabel, the name we're going to hear, he is the governor of Judah, and I think that's all we need to know. Okay. Now, when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin, and when you hear adversaries of Judah and Benjamin, think the people who stayed behind, the people who have called this place home for 70 years while you guys were away in exile. Okay. While the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the returning exiles were building a temple to the Lord, the God of Israel, they approached Zerubbabel and the heads of the families and said to them, "Let us build with you, for we worship your God as you do." Remember, they're all the same people. "And we have been sacrificing to him ever since the days of King Esarhaddon of Assyria, who brought us here." So, ever since the northern 10 tribes were conquered by Israel, were conquered by Assyria, which is before Babylon, and they scattered the people, we've been down here. We're children of Israel. We're from the tribes. We've been worshiping here for hundreds of years now, after we got kicked out of our land. But Zerubbabel, Yeshua, who's the priest, and the rest of the heads of the family in Israel said to them, "You shall have no part with us in building a house to our God, but we alone will build to the Lord, the God of Israel, as King Cyrus of Persia has commanded us." Then the people of the land discouraged the people of Judah and made them afraid to build. And they bribed officials to frustrate their plans throughout the reign of King Cyrus of Persia and until the reign of King Darius of Persia. So I hope I was able to pull up some of the weird subtleties to this chapter that you might not get in your first read through. These people that are objecting to the building of the temple claim to be children of Israel. Like, we lived up north until we got displaced down here. We've been making sacrifices here in Jerusalem for hundreds of years. We'd like to help build the temple. Can you think of a reason why they wouldn't want help?
I feel like it's probably a source of pride. Like, this is the thing we're doing. Like, even if it didn't seem like you, even though they may not have actually abandoned them, like, you left. Like, why do you think you have a say in what it is that we're doing here? We're good. We're good. Like, you stay.
So you think it's a sense of pride that the people coming home, they're going to do it themselves and they don't
like you're going to do something that is like, we're going to build like a pure thing. Like, we're going to, like, the thing that we had before, like, you've been tarnished. You went somewhere else.
You've been tarnished. Wait, who's been tarnished?
The people who were exiled.
So you think that the people who stayed think of themselves as more pure, that they don't want the people who left to build the temple because they're not pure anymore?
Maybe. It's a guess.
I think the text imagines it, portrays it the other way around, that the people who came home from exile thought of themselves as the pure chosen ones, and the people who stayed behind were half-breed mongrels that weren't fit to call themselves children of Abraham. Did you say why? That was a why? Is that what you said? Yeah. The
Hi, Dad.
hi,
Oh.
Theo.
You are not muted.
So the people who left were like I said, the priests, the only people, and there was no Bible at this time. There was no scriptures. It was not like your general person understood all of the stories. It was a practiced religion in which you brought your sacrifices to the temple, and the priest who controlled the whole thing did the religion for you so that you didn't have to. And all those religion doers, the priests and everyone, went away. So for generations, the people who stayed behind had to figure it out on their own without their priests to show them the way and teach them about this God. And so you can imagine they probably developed some things in the intervening times that the other more pure group would think was a heresy, right? Like a non-denominational church goes off and does their own thing and ordains their own pastors, and after a couple of years of not talking with other denominations comes back and is like, wow, you believe what about Jesus? Where'd you get that from? That's not in the Bible. That's not this, that, right? Like, then you've got battles of who's got the right purity of the thing. This is kind of
makes sense.
When the Jews and Samaritans in the New Testament are fighting, a lot of it stems from this. There's actually a Samaritan Bible that we never talk about. That's written, I think, in Aramaic, and it contains a lot of the same stories that the Hebrew Bible has, except certain key events happen a little bit differently. Like in the Hebrew Bible, the Ark of the Covenant is taken from Shiloh to Jerusalem, where then Solomon sets up the temple, and this is the true place of worship. This is God's mountain. This is all that stuff. In the Samaritan Bible, the ark is moved to Mount Gerizim, the true holy mountain. They think Mount Gerizim is also Mount Sinai, where God gave the commands to Moses, and like they believe that that was the true worship up there, and that it was some rebel heretic priests who broke off and went south to Jerusalem. So you can read the Hebrew Bible and the Samaritan Bible next to each other, and they will both say the same thing about their cousin. They will both say that the other one is a dangerous heretic who picked up a lot of ideas from foreign nations and isn't pure to what God gave our forefathers. Which, I don't know, I've been involved in Protestant denominations long enough to have that argument, right? That like you've got Jesus, the apostles, and then kind of some blurry time, and then the 1960s when my denomination was made.
Right.
Yeah, we forget all about those Catholics. We don't, oh, whatever, they got it wrong for a long time, and then you know the
So they were like the beginning.
wait until my particular type of Baptist showed up, and then that was when it started. Yeah. The irony, of course, is not lost on me that I'm a part of a church that is trying to recover some of that early church magic. So it's also worth noting, this is kind of a universal truth as well, that anytime a person or a group is trying to do something new, the people who have done it the old way are going to take offense at it. Right? Because every new thing is in and of itself a comment on the old thing. Because if the old thing were still working, you wouldn't be doing a new thing.
Right.
So if you are starting a new church, if you are starting a new business, if you are opening up any kind of thing that is new, the old way people will fight back against it. So I wonder if some of that, I'm sure that there's all the kind of ritual purity and it's us and we're the best and you're the worst. But I also think there's probably some of that in there, that the people who were returning had a vision, they had a plan, they had a blueprint, and they didn't want the people who stayed to give their opinion.
The people who stayed or the people who left?
The people who stayed. Because the folks who left came back with all the money and the resources, and they had a particular view of God, and they were going to build this temple to their specifications. And they didn't want to have to share with the people who were different than them. So like, I've been a part of churches that are brand new church plants, and they think that they know the way to save the city. And they don't want to work with any other church who's been there before, because they know the best way to do it. And so they march into the city with the best intentions, but they end up, you know, gentrifying and at worst and kicking out the people who have lived there before.
Yeah.
You know, there has to be a mix of making partners with the people who have been here doing the thing, and also having the ability to dream something new. Right?
Super easy to do.
So easy. So easy. So if we keep reading, starting in chapter 7, verse 7, which we're not going to read, what happens next? After we had just read that the folks who stayed, who were mad, they bribed local officials to make things difficult. They threatened the people who were trying to build this new thing. They tried to just make life miserable for them. Now they decided to hit the legal system. And we see this kind of thing all the time. If you want to shut down a church or a shelter, perhaps, one of the best ways you can do that is to try to trump up some charges and get the legal system on your side.
That's so weird. I've never heard of that.
I know it's happened twice, I think, in the history of humankind. It's this one and then some other time. Definitely not currently happening in this very moment in our town. But what they did is they sent a letter to King Artaxerxes. That's not Cyrus, is it? Cyrus is dead at this point.
Right.
And we're probably at let's see, probably at like 2 kings later. So anyone who was involved in the decision-making process to send them down with the money and all of that is gone. It's a new administration. So here is how the letter reads. And see it, what's that?
Who sent the letter?
The opponents of the temple. So these are the people who stayed behind. Later we call them Samaritans, but right now they're just the people who stayed behind while the exiles left.
Okay.
They're mad because the people who came back won't share the temple with them.
Okay.
The Jewish historian Josephus wrote much later that the plan had been they can worship at the temple, but they just can't help build it because their hands aren't clean, which is a very offensive thing to say to a person.
A little bit.
So, to King Artaxerxes, your servants, the people of the province beyond the river, which the province beyond the river just means this general area. We send our greetings. And now, may it be known to the king that the Jews who came up from you to us have gone to Jerusalem. They are rebuilding that rebellious and wicked city. They are finishing the walls and repairing the foundation. Now, may it be known to the king that if this city is rebuilt and the walls finished, they will not pay tribute, read taxes, customs, read other taxes, or tolls, and the royal revenue will be reduced. That's how you get them, right? You hit them in the purse, you tell them they're not going to pay their taxes, you're not going to be able to hit budget. Now, because we share the king's salt of the palace, which is a way of saying you and we're on the same team, and it is not fitting for us to witness the king's dishonor. Therefore, we send and inform the king so that a search may be made of the annals of your ancestors. You will discover in the annals that this is a rebellious city, hurtful to kings and provinces, and that sedition was stirred up in it from long ago. On that account, this city was laid waste. We make known to the king that if this city is rebuilt and its walls finished, you will then have no possession of the province beyond the river. So their legal strategy here is to say, which first of all, they're bending the truth because they're not trying to rebuild the walls yet. But that's a part of it, right? You have to lie a little bit. You got to bend the truth a little bit, make it seem worse than it is. Their strategy is to say, these people are rebuilding this city, and this city is filled with the sorts of people you don't want here because they're going to cause trouble. They're going to not pay taxes, so they're going to ruin your revenue stream, and they deserve what came to them, right? It was their fault that the city was laid to waste in the first place. So they deserve this. They don't deserve to rebuild this thing. They deserve to suffer for their actions. I have heard this argument used so many times against people who would try to do things to help others, especially in cities that are in need. When somebody tries to, I don't know, I don't want to keep saying build a shelter, but that sort of thing, you know, where we don't want the undesirables in our city. they are going to ruin our city. Our thing that we've done that's worked fine, that my parents were here and things were great before they got here, but now they've come in here, the outsiders have come in here with their weird ways and their sedition and their rebellion, and they're going to corrupt our children and ruin everything. We need you to go look through the histories and tell them they can't be here. So that worked. The king went through, sent his historian out to go look, and found he had to travel, actually. Where does it say? He had to travel to Media, to not, anyway, he had to go somewhere else to a different library to find the writings of Nebuchadnezzar, the king who originally conquered them 70, 80 years earlier, and found, oh yeah, they were pretty rebellious. They didn't pay their taxes back then. They fought openly against Babylon, so they'll probably fight openly against us. We need to shut down the project. So they commanded to the people, to the Jewish people, you have to stop building your temple. You can no longer worship there, and you need to leave. Cease and desist.
Stop it.
That's what they said. Look, I'm not making this up. It's in the Bible.
Made to cease. It doesn't say desist.
It's in my translation, I
I'm
promise.
trying to see what my translation says.
Therefore, issue an order that these people may be made to cease,
And
that the city
desist.
not be
It's-
rebuilt.
No, it's Vachol Kadesh. It's in the Hebrew. Actually, no, that actually is a word. That is not what it means. I tried to make up a fake Hebrew
I'm
word.
making things up.
Sorry, it's offensive. So they stopped. They did what they were told to do. They
Stop
stopped
it.
building. It's true. I'm just telling the story. I am not currently telling the story about what is happening in Pottstown right now. I am telling a story from the Bible that happened thousands of years ago, Nicole, and I really am offended that you would. Okay. At the time, the work on the house of God in Jerusalem stopped and was discontinued until the second year of the reign of King Darius of Persia. Are you happy? It's in the Bible. Okay. But they did, and they stopped. Probably they were afraid of, Persian troops. Apparently they had a lot of tattletales in their midst who were going to squeal on them if they tried to build in secret or anything like that. And so they just stopped. All of the treasures of the temple that had been taken and then that had been returned were sitting in a storehouse somewhere, just growing dust, waiting for the temple to be remade, for the center of worship and identity to come back to the city that they loved. But they stopped, and they waited. They waited and they waited and they waited. And this is when the prophets Haggai and Zechariah are writing. They have their own books in the books of the prophets. A couple of weeks ago, Max preached a sermon on a passage from Haggai, and he said that the prophets are full of, what did he say? Sassy nuggets. That was the phrase.
Yeah.
The prophets were full of sassy nuggets that they hurled at the people in charge. And if you read them, they are a little sassy. They're basically, God told you to do this thing. God commanded you to rebuild this. You didn't come up with this idea. This is a divine commandment, and you just rolled over the moment that the authorities told you to. Really? Do you actually trust in God? Because if you did, you'd start rebuilding. And they not so subtly nudged and nudged and nudged and nudged, until chapter 5. They got together with their legal counsel, or their brain trust of people, and decided to write a new letter. And I'm not going to read that letter.
You're not going to read all the letters. You're just going to read the ones that back up.
All right, I'll read the letter. We are the servants of the God of heaven and earth, and we are rebuilding the house that was built many years ago, which a great king of Israel built and finished. But
Where you
because
at?
sorry, I'm in verse 12 of chapter 5. But because our ancestors had angered the God of heaven, he gave them into the hand of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon the Chaldean, who destroyed this house and carried away the people of Babylon. By the way, very good humility in that right there. He admits it is our fault that this happened. We rebelled against God, and God handed us over to Nebuchadnezzar. We're sorry. We own that part of our failure. However, King Cyrus of Babylon, in the first year of his reign, which he's not of Babylon, but whatever, he's of Persia. In the first year of his reign, made a decree that this house of God should be rebuilt. Moreover, the gold and silver vessels of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem and had brought into the temple of Babylon, these King Cyrus took out of the temple of Babylon, and they were delivered to a man named Sheshbazzar, whom he had made governor. And he said to him, "Take these vessels, go and put them in the temple, and let the house of God be rebuilt on this site." Then this Sheshbazzar came and laid the foundations of the house of God in Jerusalem. And from that time until now, it has been under construction and is not yet finished. And now, if it seems good to the king, have a search made in the royal archives there in Babylon to see whether a decree was issued by King Cyrus for the rebuilding of the house of God in Jerusalem. Let the king send his pleasure in this matter. Oh, this is the one where it wasn't in Babylon. He had to go to Media, not the Media on the main line, but one that's in their area.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yes, absolutely. Because I know we've got Bethlehem and Nazareth,
Right.
Ephrata and everything else out here.
Allentown.
Allentown, yes, that is also in the Bible.
It is.
No, it's not. The high priest Allen. Yeah.
Right.
So that letter is kind of brilliant. For two reasons. The first is that they own their mistakes, the mistakes of their forebearers, that yeah, we're in this mess because our people messed up. We made mistakes. We deserve the punishment that we got. However, that's in the past. And now we were given permission by Cyrus to rebuild the temple. And now, that might not seem all that important on its head. Cyrus is known as Cyrus the Great. Cyrus the Great was seen as almost a god in those times. He was the first great conquering emperor of the ancient world. He was like unbeatable, unstoppable. The people of Persia saw him like second to God, to their God. And he was a folk hero at that point. So it would be like during the administration of, let's say, Rutherford B. Hayes, someone were to say, well, George Washington gave us this property. So now you've invoked the legendary name of our founder, that he's the one. Had you said John Adams gave us this, then they might be like, well, he was an idiot, so we're going to keep it. His decree doesn't matter. But you invoked George Washington. So now it's heavier. Now it means something. So they call out Cyrus and they say, go find the decrees of Cyrus. And you'll see. So humility and a little wise strategic manipulation of hero worship. And it worked. And it worked like wild. Because we read in chapter 6 that it they not only were like, oh yeah, we did find that. Oops. But let's see. They sent a letter to this Tatanai in verse 6, governor of the province beyond the river. The people who wrote this letter, you need to make sure that this temple gets built, and any extra cost is to be paid to these people in full without delay from the royal revenue, the tribute paid by you. So you who brought these charges against them, you're going to have to cover the cost of any extra expenditures. So the people of God stepped out in faith, and they not only got back the original go-ahead, but they got more than they had asked for. And the people who had tried to shut them down ended up having to pay for it, which is delicious.
Is this like prophetic towards?
I mean, this is a story that happens a few times in the Hebrew Scriptures. Am I speaking that into existence? Am I speaking that not only does Pottstown open the only permanent shelter in Montgomery County, but we become a hub of rehabilitation and a place where people who are addicted to drugs can find healing and new life and better future? I'll name it.
Preach.
So like the Samaritans, like that, like the people who would then be called the Samaritans, right? Like did that group ever come together? Like, or was this, it was always like the religious elite that came back and did this thing against these people who were kind of like the scrappy underbelly of the community, because that's tricky and messy too, right? Like
yeah. It's almost like you are anticipating chapter 8 and chapter 9. Chapter 9 is where that comes to a head.
Perfect.
Yeah, because it is messy, right? The work of the new people versus the work of the old, the people who stayed versus the people who came later, the folks who have lived here their entire lives versus the folks who came here for the revitalization, the people who came from out of town, the New York developers who buy up spaces to build hipster coffee shops in predominantly Black neighborhoods and then gentrify Fishtown and Brooklyn and places like that, right? There is always this really messy push and pull between these groups.
Right.
And I want to be clear that what Ezra does in chapter 9 and what the Jews who return will do, we don't necessarily have to condone it. Just because it's in the Bible doesn't mean it's the right decision. There's plenty of things that happen in the Bible that are no good. Like that time that those kids called Elisha baldhead and he called down a bear to kill them. Like, don't do that. That's not a good thing.
Ugh.
Because maybe the Jewish people don't even have this whole problem if they just let the people who stayed help. What if they collaborate instead of trying to make their own thing and thinking of their own purity? What happens then? We skip straight to chapter 8 and just miss this whole thing. No.
Is that you ending this
No,
for the week? So
in a few minutes, but I'll just then say briefly in passing that after all of that, we get like 2 verses that they built the whole temple. So we get all that description of what happened before. Then after all the problems solved, they go, oh, and then it's done. Ta-da! Temple. Because the actual building of the thing wasn't important. That's not like the nuts and bolts of it's this cubits wide, it's this cubits high, the candlestick looked like this looked like that. That matters a lot in like the book of Exodus, when, or even in like in Samuel describing the first temple. Like that matters when they're building that. When they're building this temple, what matters is the interpersonal relationships more than the edifice itself, because they're building a people.
right,
Um,
putting roots down. They're calling this home.
yeah. So on the 14th day of the first month, verse 19, the returned exiles kept the Passover. For both the priests and the Levites had purified themselves. All of them were clean. So they killed the Passover lamb for the returned exiles, for their fellow priests and for themselves. Do you hear that? They
Didn't invite any outsiders.
No. Josephus says the original plan was they couldn't help build it, but they could worship there. But they pushed it, and they poisoned their own water in their relationship with each other. And now that it's done, they're celebrating Passover, the festival of their salvation from slavery, and they make the sacrifice for themselves, for the priests, for the returned exiles, and that's it. And it was eaten by the people of Israel who'd returned from exile, and all who joined them, and separated themselves from the pollutions of the nations of the land to worship God, the God of Israel. So our people
read into that, and not the Samaritans.
So our people and any people who disowned, who could prove their lineage and disowned their people, came with us, which reminds me very much of like what the church did to like Native Americans, where it was like, you could be one of us as long as you are thoroughly white and Christian and you keep none of your native heritage. But with joy, they celebrated the festival of unleavened bread for 7 days, for the Lord had made them joyful and had turned the heart of the king of Assyria to them, so that he aided them in the work of the house of God, the God of Israel. So there is joy. There is the completion of something new. There is celebration. It is complicated celebration. And maybe that's just because we have the gift of being able to read into later chapters. But I think it's important when we're building something to build it the right way, to build it with help and collaboration.
Humility.
because by the time of Jesus, this has turned into a much bigger feud. It started small here, but it's going to get a lot bigger later because they didn't nip it in the bud early. So I think of like every generation, how like the reckoning of white supremacy comes back, and there is some reckoning with groups of people. There's always some powder keg, the spark that lights the powder keg, and so every other generation has just passed it on to the next one to deal with. And it continually just gets worse and worse and worse because no one will deal with it. And then so, we have the choice to be the people who deal with it, so our children don't have to later. That we collaborate in building this thing new. Sorry for the monologue. Do you have any thoughts? Any questions?
No, it's all new to me, this text and everything. So I'm just trying to keep up a little bit. So sorry for the not much to contribute.
No, not at all.
But
I figure kind of
that-
most folks haven't read these.
No, I never did.
And so I'm trying to tell it as a story.
Yeah, it's great. It's great, but I'm sorry that I don't have more to contribute, but it's very much easier to understand with you breaking it down, but I'm still kind of like not, just trying to take it all in.
Yeah. And the thing about a true story is that not that it happened, but that it happens. And it happens all the time. And we can relate so much to it.
Yeah.
When you take out the really complicated names and places. And
Right. Yeah, and that's
stories,
fascinating. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fascinating.
right. I always tell.
Well, and like translate like scroll to letter, right? Like that, like a scroll to me seems like something that's like other, but so and so wrote a letter to the person and to try to persuade them to take their side, and they did, and they were like, oh, you're bad, but then like that same group was like, oh no, like here are our defense, this actually is okay, and they're like, oh yeah, you're right, like also, so here's all the stuff. Like when I think of a scroll, I don't think of it as a letter, but it's something like a decree. So I think hearing that,
like when
and also what's happening in Pottstown is also helpful for interpreting this too. Like
I think of when Philadelphia mayor made it illegal to give people food in Center City.
Yeah.
Like because they wanted to get rid of the homeless people to help with tourism. And so, a group from the Simple Way brought out pizza and soda, and they had communion with pizza and soda and handed it to all of the homeless people in Center City. And then when they got arrested, they said, it's our religious liberty to practice our sacraments, the sacrament of Holy Communion. This is bread, this is juice. It just happened to be pizza and soda, but it's the elements. And they not only won that lawsuit, but the judge then awarded them like 10 grand or something like that, which they then used to do some other demonstration up in New York. But like that idea that sometimes in order to overcome unjust rulings, you need to do a little holy trouble, get yourself in the midst of it, and then find a receptive ear who can hear the unjust ruling and can reverse it.
I'm glad this isn't relevant. That would be real weird.
Yeah, absolutely
very
not relevant at all.
Very timely.
So, if next time that we get together, we will finally meet the person for whom the book is named, Ezra. To this point, it has just been, it has been in the third person. It's going to transition to first person because Ezra is writing this account, this book. Ezra is basically a scribe. He is a religious whiz, and the Jewish tradition has him creating the this like council of learned people. That's basically like the Justice League of early Jewish thinkers, who basically create what we know of as the Jewish religion, who take it from something that is something that is practiced in the temple to something that is practiced in the hearts of people. Lots of people think that Ezra was the one who edited together the volume that would later become the Bible. He is instrumental in helping to bring together all of the various traditions and create a cohesive Judaism. He is also extremely problematic as a person,
Ezra?
and is what we would call a intolerable racist bigot, probably in our modern terms.
Oh.
So it is a very mixed bag of what comes next, with some very overt, complicated racism, some exclusion, some a pinch of misogyny, just for taste, and also some really important wisdom for making a people and for finding truth in the midst of pluralism. So it is going to be interesting, at least. And there's going to be a lot of things that we're going to have to say, let's wrestle with this thing instead of just accepting it whole hog. So I look forward to diving into that in the next week or two. So thank you for joining us. And
Yeah.
you who joined us online, thank you for taking the time as well.
Yeah, I saw Deb Schwartz saw this was happening.
Wonderful.
Thank you
We
for
missed-
taking the time to do the to put that together. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Charlie has to show me something now, so.